Hello everyone, time for round 2. I lost the die roll and my hand isn't phenomenal. I'm still gonna keep though. I have the step and the light to draw me into something else. If I draw a creature, then the trigger of Mistmoon Griffin is very reasonable, and don't really have reason to believe that a 6-card hand is going to be better than what I have here. Alright, off to the races. Might be playing against white-red, little mirror here. Oh, interesting, Goblin Trenches. So that actually makes cycling Secluded Step a bit worse. Long term, the trenches are definitely going to be valuable, but that's the case whether or not I cycle the step. So I think I'm still going to do that, just to maybe draw into Flame Tongue or Teros Faithful. I might also be facing a very aggressive deck here. White-red is really an aggressive archetype at heart. Which does mean that this Gilded Light is also not really doing me any favors here. I have to be very scared of Battle Screech. That's a card that's just very difficult to beat, especially if it's flashbacked immediately. So that's 4 mana, get two 1/1 flyers, and flashback, tap 3 white creatures. So if you have one untapped white creature, it's basically Spectral Procession for an additional mana, but you also get an additional counter. My opponent with the Goblin Matron, so might be a bit of a Goblin theme there. Maybe just the guy that makes 2 1/1s. You could definitely play the Matron even if you aren't a fully dedicated Goblin deck. And it is Beetleback Chief, so now I also have to be scared of Rites of Initiation. Solitary Trooper, not the card that I wanted to see here necessarily. Teros Faithful would be great. Maybe a little bit of Faithful into Mistmoon Griffin action. Another land. So Goblin Trenches is nice, but it has 0 impact on the board, whereas Solitary Trooper at least deals damage to my opponent. Yeah, this is going to be a lot of damage. If my opponent has a land here, that's another 4 power from the Chief. And then next turn I will only have the Mistmoon Griffin to block, and I don't really want to block a 2-powered creature with the Griffin, so I might be taking quite a bit of damage. Let's see, Scabland deals 1 damage if my opponent uses it for red. Not much I can do about that. Then 19 life with 5 creatures on the board against my shadow guy. Not the best position. So yeah, I need to draw one of my good 4-drops. Teros Faithful or Flame Tongue Kavu, I think, are the cards that I want to see the most. Even a Phantom Nomad would have been quite nice on this board. As you can see, it's basically pure card advantage. Oh, Teros Faithful, I'll take it. Oh, no, I missed the attack step. All right. Don't know what I clicked there. It definitely wasn't the right button. Missing 2 damage. Don't think my trooper is very good on defense. For those of you that are not old enough to know what Shadow does, it's basically evasion, but in a sense that shadow creatures can only fight with each other. So you can only be blocked or block creatures with shadow, other creatures with shadow. So now the Faithful should hold off Phantom Nomad, Goblin Matron, and the 2 Goblin tokens. And then there might actually be no attack for my opponent, no reasonable attack. And that's it, everything is coming in. So I'll try to get rid of a Goblin here. And let's see, yeah, no Rites of Initiation at least. Okay, it's just my opponent killing Teros Faithful. Alright. And Solitary Emissary, so that can actually gain Shadow, which means that having this Solitary Trooper is actually quite valuable. And now it's going to stay on defense, which in return means that my opponent is never going to activate this. Kind of a fun interaction. I'm almost dead to the pile driver, but with the Mistman Griffin, I get to return Terror's Faithful. So if my opponent doesn't have anything else, then I might stay alive just barely, and then Mistman Griffin could do a pretty good job. As long as Terror's Faithful is the top card of my library, of course. If the Soltari Trooper blocks the Soltari Emissary, then I only get back Soltari Trooper, which is a lot weaker. Goblin General. Yep, that's good. That's a very good one. Still attacking. Interesting. So my opponent is willing to let me trade with a Goblin here, although it would have been a 3/3 next turn, and I'm getting back Theros Faithful. I think that's a very good exchange for me. I can't block this, but I wouldn't have blocked it either. So I think my opponent should have activated this to give it a Shadow, to give me the option to block it with the Trooper. And I think this is definitely the right call here. Getting rid of a Goblin seems definitely worth it. Getting back Terror's Faithful seems superb. And Thopter Squadron. So I don't even know if I'm still alive if I just cast the Trenches. If I cast the Trenches, I'm basically getting 2 Goblin Soldier tokens. Oh, those aren't bad. Those definitely aren't bad. If I cast Goblin Trenches, I'm getting 2 Goblins as well. 2 1/1s, rather than a 2/2 and a 1/1. The Thopter Squadron does look a bit better, to be honest, giving me a bit more power, and the way my mana works out, Goblin Trenches is going to be most efficient the turn after that anyway. Now, one thing I could do is to actually leave the Squadron a 3/3. That would mean that the Squadron is free to block Goblin General, but then I don't really have any other blocks. That wouldn't really be great. So if I make a 2/2 and a 1/1, I can chump block the Pile Driver with a 1/1, kill the General with the 2/2, and Hero's Faithful gets to block whatever else my opponent has, maybe the Soltari Emissary. If I have the 3/3, I would like to kill Goblin General, but I will be forced to chump block Goblin Pile Driver with Hero's Faithful, and that just doesn't seem right. Chump blocking with the Faithful seems worse than chump blocking with one of these 1/1s. Alright, I might be close to dead here, but if my opponent doesn't draw anything good this turn, the Goblin Trenches could actually pull this out. I'm not sure if I can afford to sacrifice all I have, but it's going to be a bunch of 1/1s against my opponent's board. So let's see. I love the fact that I have a Soltari Trooper on defense against my opponent's Soltari Emissary. Opponent cycles a Forgotten Cave, and that's already a lot better than having drawn... Oh wow. Than having drawn a land, of course. Now this Goblin Ringleader, 2/2 haste, would have been absolutely insane if it had revealed any goblins. It didn't, but it was still a super powerful draw by my opponent. Giving him another 3/3 attacker, basically. So this gets Shadow. I think that's a pretty bad activation by my opponent. That doesn't really make sense at all. So I could block like this. Getting the General off the table is a high priority for me. Chump blocking the Pile Driver is a necessity. Killing this is clearly the right choice. And then the Faithful could block the Ringleader to prevent the most damage, but blocking Phantom Nomads turns it into a 1/1, which has some value on its own. So that way I'm taking 7, I'm going down to 6, not the best life total to be on, but definitely one that I can recover from. So yeah, that's my block. I'm going to put the Squadron on top in case I draw another one of these Griffins. And then I draw a Phantom Nomad. So it's definitely time for Goblin Trenches. And those could make 4 tokens, but Phantom Nomads blocked Goblin Pile Driver very nicely. I think it's just better to cast it, having a blocker for the Pile Driver. And I'm still getting 2 Goblins out of the Trenches. Yeah, that Goblin Ringleader was a very good draw by my opponent. And my opponent has a Goblin Trenches as well. This is fun. I expect no attacks here. Well, I was wrong. Wow, this is a crazy game. So the Nomads are pretty much dead. They aren't much better than 1/1s at this stage. I need to kill the Pile Driver, what the Nomads are really good at. The Nomads are really good at that. And now the only question is, how do I deal with this 2/2? I can block it with a Faithful and a token. That would mean I'm taking an additional 2 points of damage. But otherwise, I'm taking 2 damage also. If I trade 1/1s, my opponent keeps the Ringleader, I'm taking 2 damage this turn also. So getting rid of the 2/2 in a fight of when most of us is fighting with 1/1s seems smart. So yeah, getting rid of the Ringleader, and of course also getting rid of the Phantom Nomad in case my opponent has some pump for it. Oh boy, the Goblin Trenches mirror. But I'm the control Goblin Trenches, and my opponent is the aggro Goblin Trenches. Are you gonna activate the trenches? Yeah, looks like it. We have pretty much the same amount of lands, so that's a good thing. Solar Blast is also very nice. Could use that immediately just to draw the card and know so that I know what's happening. I also have 3 activations of this, so that's 6 1/1s, which does mean that I can put on a bit of pressure here. The Phantom Nomads just trade for a Goblin, so that's kind of meh. They don't really do anything spectacular. If I Solar Blast now, I might have the time to draw something sweet, so that I can still cast it before having sacrificed all my lands. I think that's actually worth it. I still get 2 activations out of the trenches if I don't. And killing a Goblin token, or even the Matron. Maybe the Matron is the stronger card at this stage. I'm not concerned about killing untapped creatures. Don't think it makes a difference, so. Also, I would have to wait for the untapped creatures to enter the battlefield. So maybe I can draw a nice spell here, and I would still have the time to cast it this turn. Even if it's just a tapper, it would be fine. So the Cougar is actually interesting. It might be better to just trade it into a land at some point. So if I sacrifice 2 of my lands, I'm short to cast the Cougar, which I have to keep in mind. Now the Faithful are going to prevent all these goblins from attacking, but it might actually not be too bad if we are just trading. If we're just trading lands. I still think it's better to leave them back, as my opponent will basically not have a good attack with his goblins, and that way I will not be forced to sacrifice all my lands, and I can hopefully spend 1 turn just cougaring. It might actually not be the case though. With my opponent threatening 3 activations, so that's another 6 tokens. I don't think I'm surviving if I just... Well, let's see, another 6 tokens is 9 tokens, and I would only have 5 creatures? No, I'm just dead then. Alright, that was an easy decision. I'm definitely just going to Mountain Cycle this. I want my lands. If this is a matchup where it comes down to just having more lands, then I'm gonna trade my 4/4 for lands. And I'm still not sure if holding back the Faithful is actually what I want to be doing. And the fun thing is, I have to be as aggressive as possible while still surviving here. So because I know that my opponent will have an additional 6 creatures, so that's 9 attackers, I kind of want to have the same amount. I'm generating as many as my opponent will. I have the Faithful to make this exchange favorable for me. So I think if I attack with 2 and my opponent takes it, then an all-out attack by my opponent only deals me 1 point of damage, while I get to eat one of my opponent's creatures on an otherwise stable board. Now this is bad against a top deck Chain Lightning, but I don't know. I don't think I can really play around that. This is my way of generating a bit of value. I'm either dealing a point of damage that I wouldn't have dealt, or I'm eating a creature with Taros Faithful. My opponent did not make any goblins. I was definitely not expecting that. I think just hoping for a top deck is significantly worse than going into the Goblin Trenches war. Because if there's 2 Goblin Trenches on both sides of the board, you don't just decline the Goblin Trenches battle. You don't just decline the Goblin Trenches battle. So here, I drew a Phantom Nomad, and I think we've seen before that that's usually better than casting, than making more goblins, but I'm not sure because it's really only about being able to block. So because my opponent has this option of just letting through damage and then having all these attackers, I have to be careful again. So I'm gonna be preparing for 9 attackers again. So if I leave back 5 and the nomads, that's 6, 7, 8 with the 2 goblins that I'm making. 7, 8. Yeah, once again, I would be dying to a top decked burn spell. 5. I could also play around it completely by just making goblins rather than the nomads, which actually seems better. Just being super safe here, but still attacking for 5 should force my opponent to respond at some point. The fact that I'm on 4 against 15 is actually huge in this kind of battle. I'm still confused that my opponent just declined to sacrifice any lands. I don't think that's correct at all. Now we're talking. So this does look like my opponent wants to block here. And the more creatures block, the happier I am, because the creatures on my opponent's side are threatening to kill me. Whereas now there's at most 4 attackers, so I don't even have to play around these additional attackers anymore. I'm actually fine casting nomads now because they are great attackers on this kind of board. But it's still correct to just sacrifice your lands. I don't really know why my opponent didn't do it. And once again, I have to do the math. I'm facing up to 6 goblins. If my opponent just takes everything, I'm generating 4, so I'm holding back 2 creatures to block with. And it doesn't really matter what they are. The Faithful is an easy one. And then I want to deal damage with the nomads, so I'm just holding back the other nomads, for example. The fun thing is that this game is not really over. Kind of depends on if my opponent can do something reasonable with the lands, or if he just also makes all these goblins, and then it's pretty much an even board. So getting this Gustral Carrier onto the battlefield is something that I really want to be doing, but I can only do that if my opponent chooses to trade here. But if my opponent takes the damage, then I'm just overwhelming him with goblins. So in either way, I'm gonna be fine. So I don't think that taking 7 here from my opponent is really an option. It doesn't get better, it just gets worse. All right, 1 activation, 2nd activation, and the good thing for me is that I'm kind of out of burn range once my opponent doesn't have the necessary lands anymore. And because my opponent opted for a defensive use of his trenches, he's kind of committed to playing it that way. And clearly I get the most use out of my cards if I cast my spells rather than sacrificing all my lands. Because then only lands would be life draws from then on. Whereas now I still have the trenches. Alright, so Terry Emissary and Black Lotus. The Solitary Emissary is threatening to kill me in 2 turns. Noble Templar, not a great help. So, oh boy, how do I do this? The Black Lotus allows my opponent to make 4 goblins, and if I take an additional 2 from the goblins, I'm also dead. Now, my opponent sacrifices the 2 mountains. He also still has the emissary to activate. This is really bad for me. 4 goblins and the emissary. That's 5 attackers. I have to block 4 of them, and I can do that if I just make goblins all around. Attack with everything, make goblins, survive. I think I'm just 1 damage short to kill my opponent. If my opponent plays correctly. If my opponent doesn't block here at all. And that probably means that I wasn't aggressive enough with my Taros Faithful very early on. When I decided that playing around Chain Lightning was something that I could do. Okay, my opponent blocks here, and that might actually be the difference. But I'm not sure. I might just be dead. Because now my clock is even... Yeah, my clock is even less now. Let's just see what happens. I'm all in on Goblin Trenches. My opponent opts not to do anything, not to get any tokens here. I will force my opponent to actually use the emissary. Shadow, of course. So now, because I'm on 2, my opponent is on 8, but has a lot of blockers available. I think my best bet is to Plane Cycle Noble Templar, hoping to draw into Taros Faithful or Flametongue Kavu to get me out of this. Don't know if there's other outs in my deck, but making more goblins is definitely not an out because my opponent just has enough blockers. So let's see, I have Spark Spray, Taros Faithful, Flametongue Kavu. That's pretty much it. The trappers are too slow. Yeah, so it's Flametongue, Spark Spray, Taros Faithful. Oh, that's not it. So I think I have to give my opponent enough credit that he's going to kill me here. I do want to know how my opponent would want to play this. Is he defensive, just creating blockers and blocks the ground creatures, not risking anything? Yeah, it looks like that's what's happening. Sacrificing the Lotus? No. Alright, so just content with preventing a bit of damage, keeping the Lotus around, which is smart because the Lotus is also threatening 4 damage, basically. And staying on 4 life is quite safe from most of the things that can happen. Alright, the Shadow guy gets me in the end after I thought I had stabilized. This was definitely close, but the Emissary a bit too strong here, ultimately. And once my opponent activates the... Yeah, then I'm just dead. Alright, let's see how close I was to finding an answer. Not very close. So, a bit more careful with the Shadow next game. And I think we need some sideboarding. I think that I need some measures to get around what my opponent is doing. Apart from the fact that my opponent has a Black Lotus. Some of what I'm doing doesn't seem particularly great. Even the Bananas Trappers, to be honest, don't seem amazing. But, for example, these Gilded Lights are not something that I can afford to do. Even Astro's Light might not be good enough. I need to survive, and then my opponent still has the Goblin Trenches, which are really good, of course. So one thing I'm looking at is Death by Elite combined with Brilliant Halo. That could actually be a more proactive and better game plan when looking at what my opponent is capable of doing. I'm looking at Seal of Cleansing as well. If my opponent just drops the Lotus, I can kill it. If my opponent has Goblin Trenches again, I can make sure that I'm winning the mirror in that regard. So that could also be interesting. So I want the Death Blades, I want the Halo. I'm leaving in the Solitary Trooper, and I feel like I can't really take out Banana Trapper. I mean, it's a tapper. It's just a good card, period. So Burning of Zinnia as a mass removal spell, super interesting. I don't know if it's the kind of card that would win me this mirror, with the fact being that everything just dies, including my own stuff. Maybe not the Phantom Nomads with the Brilliant Halo. I could definitely try the Burning. It's just unclear to me if it's a good idea or not. So I like everything else. I like the creatures. 3/3 haste, maybe not the most impressive card in this matchup. It's still a 5 mana 3/3. It's definitely a card I could cut. That said. Alright, Seal of Cleansing I don't think is making it. The only question is if I also want to try Burning of Zinnia. It seems really weird to play Burning together with Deathblade Elite and Brilliant Halo though. I think I can probably win the Goblin Trenches fight as long as I can control everything else. So let's just take out a Hellion. I like my Cyclers, I like my mana sources here. And I have to keep in mind that this is not an Astral Slide deck anymore. Alright, wish me luck. Gonna be playing first against this hyper-aggressive deck. Not that I died very quickly. So this hand is absolutely insane. I have both colors of mana. I have a Deathblade Elite and the Brilliant Halo to go with it, and once the Halo goes to the graveyard, I can enchant Phantom Nomad. So the way Deathblade Elite works is that you can provoke an opposing creature, and that just has to block. So once the Brilliant Halo is on Deathblade Elite, you can actually just kill your opponent's creature. So if my opponent has a 1-drop here, I'm just suiting up the Deathblade Elite with Brilliant Halo, and I'm gonna kill it. Flame Tongue, also quite nice. I'm not showing the Brilliant Halo immediately. What you can also do is you provoke a creature, it has to block the Deathblade Elite, and then you prevent all damage to it, which is a reasonable use of the card. Basically taking out a blocker. I'm trying for a more control-oriented use of Deathblade Elite here. So that's a Goblin Patrol. It would have cost Echo, but my opponent will not have to pay that if I just kill it with Brilliant Halo. I don't think there is a reason at all to try to get cute here. Having the Brilliant Halos resolve on Deathblade Elite on turn 3 with another creature in play is so valuable that it's just so much more important than having this Gustclaw Carrier in play one turn earlier. That resolves. And I want to use the Provoke ability. Opponent is forced to block, Goblin Patrol goes down, and it's my opponent's turn. As you can see, the Deathblade Elite is now just going to eat all the small white and red creatures that my opponent could play, which is quite a lot of them. Keep in mind that this is pre-modern era card, so having a 2/3 that is already a pretty big deal, which is why Flame Tongue is so insane. It basically kills everything in the format. And it's Goblin Trenches, so my opponent is on the Goblin Trenches plan again. Maybe a mountain, that would be nice. I'll probably just cast Gustclaw Carrier anyway. It's also possible that my opponent just didn't have a choice here. Playing a creature that just dies to Deathblade Elite is not a good option, so he uses his mana to get the trenches down. Alright, I didn't draw a land, but a Phantom Nomad. Still gonna play Gustclaw Carrier. Diversify my cards a little bit. So, the way Provoke works, I assume that not all of you know this mechanic. It's an onslaught block mechanic with provoke, not only forcing the creature to block, but also untapping it. So if you choose to provoke a creature, it untaps and has to block. Which means that not even tapped creatures are safe from being provoked. One thing that my opponent can threaten here is to just sacrifice two lands, make 4/1/1s, triple block Deathblade Elite, and try to get rid of it that way. I could just spend 2 mana then to not have Deathblade Elite take any damage. Or use one of my removal spells to good effect. It's still probably a better plan than just casting a creature that's not large enough. Alright, so it's Beetleback Chief, which has the potential to just kill the Deathblade Elite if more than one creature blocks here. Alright, this is a great draw, clearly, a Mountain Bay, pretty much the perfect draw. I could Solar Blast a Goblin if once my opponent blocks with the Chief and presumably both Goblins. I could also just Flame Tongue the Beetleback Chief, take out a Goblin with the Elite, and then my opponent is pretty much done for as well. Not even sure what's best here. If I just Flame Tongue the Beetleback, a Goblin chump blocks, another Goblin probably blocks Phantom Nomad just because. And if I Solar Blast a Goblin token, I'm most likely getting all the Goblins off the battlefield. I would expect. Oh, that's not even true. If my opponent triple blocks, I have to Solar Blast the Beetleback Chief. So then it's definitely better to just take out the Chief. Oh, I think. Yeah. All right. My opponent has seen enough. This provoke interaction is just quite powerful. All right. That was easy enough. Boarding into this unfair interaction of Deathblade Elite and Brilliant Halo worked out perfectly. So yeah, I don't think I need Burning of Zinnia. I don't think I need the Astral Sight in this matchup. And I don't know, Seal of Cleansing seems a bit too reactive. I actually think that the Burning would be the better card to play against Goblin Trenches. I just don't feel that going up to 6 to survive and kill everything I have as well is what I necessarily want to be doing with this kind of deck. I feel that I can actually just play a very fair game, as long as there isn't anything absolutely absurd happening on either side. Well, not as good of a hand, but still an easy keep here. With Banana Trapper, maybe actually being used to block. I could see suiting it up with the Halo, especially if I don't draw the second planes, which would be a bit of a problem anyway. But then at least I have a turn 2 defensive play. At some point I'm going to get my flyers onto the battlefield. Yeah, just imagine having a Burning of Zinnia in this hand. It wouldn't be pretty. Let's go. Yeah, casual Black Lotus turn 1. Maybe a Beetleback Chief. Looks like that's happening. No, Goblin Ringleader. Okay, didn't hit anything, but basically a 2/2 haste on my opponent's side. 5, 6, 7 cards, yep. Alright, I drew a mountain, not great. I wanted to see planes, of course, but hopefully Banana Trapper with Brilliant Halo can hold something off. It's also not the best news here. Oh boy, I need this Deathblade Elite in play. Can't afford to not cast it. It would have been absolutely insane had I drawn that last turn. Now the real question is how this Banana Trapper is going to be active or not. In which regard it's going to be active. It doesn't look like it's going to be active. Now, this I can't block, just taking 3 here. But what does my opponent play? That's the big question. If there's nothing on my opponent's side, the Halo takes over. If it's a small creature, the Halo takes over. Alright, this is fair enough. So I get to Halo up the Elite while I can. I get to eat my opponent's first Trapper here. And then my opponent has to keep up the other Trapper, cutting him off of white mana to hold up Deathblade Elite. And even though there's a Chimeric Idol, so my opponent could have actually attacked. So this turn is interesting. I have the Bananish Trapper. It's only a 1/2, but it turns into a 2/4 with the help of Brilliant Halo. Chimeric Idol and Bananish Trapper work really weak together, so I'm kind of happy to see that. I could run out a 2/2 here, maybe also to just block the ringleader, but of course long term I want to be getting into this Trapper battle where I tap my opponent's Trapper, and then I have the Deathblade Elite to take over. There's actually some fun interactions here. If my opponent has the Trapper and a mana and I provoke it, my opponent gets this untapped, can use it again, so that it doesn't have to block. If I cast the Trapper here though, I think that I'm forced to cast Brilliant Halo on it as well. Otherwise, I think I'm taking too much damage. Let's see. Yeah, I think I need the elite on defense. I need a 2/3 on defense, or a 2/4 in the case of the Trapper. Probably shouldn't have cast it beforehand, but I don't think it makes a big difference. So because the Trapper can't block the ringleader, I would be taking 5 damage if my opponent activates the idol. But is it even possible for my opponent to activate the idol? Then the ringleader and the idol are hitting me for 5, so that's 6 damage. Yeah, but my opponent also casts something else. Having the Halo for the Deathblade Elite is also nice, but the Deathblade Elite is good enough on its own. I'm gonna spend this Halo. I think it's a good use of this card. I also might not be able to cast anything next turn because I'm restricted on white mana. So let's see what happens here. This is very interesting. Now that I have a 2/4, at least my opponent has a bit to think about, rather than having all the options of going either super aggro or full defense. Alright, Goblin General. That's beatable. My opponent's still with the stronger Tapper, if that makes sense. Plains or a spell I can cast that would be good. Maybe a Flametongue Kavu. That's usually a good draw. The Vintage Master. Black Lotus. I wanted to open that, and then my opponent somehow got it. Don't know what went wrong there. Thopter Squadron. Alright, it's a castable card. It's a 3/3. It does something. So let's see what my opponent taps here. Who knows? Maybe he taps the Deathblade Elite. I think it would be probably correct not to tap anything, because attacking with this 2/3, I don't even have anything I can provoke without the idol being a big problem. So I'm very happy about this. Now, without anything else on the battlefield, I'm not confident in just holding up the Trapper. And because I have to develop my board, this 3/3 is working just fine. And now you can, I think, see how important it is that my Bananish Trapper is actually a 2/4. It is such a more, well, it's the difference between having a 1/2 on the battlefield and a 2/4 is huge. The presence this adds is just on another level, basically. Now I might be getting into trouble. I could draw Plains here, which would be fine, or maybe I just generate a lot of tokens and hope that works out somehow. Flametongue Kavu is still a good draw. Give me the Flametongue. Terror's Faithful. I'll settle for the Terror's Faithful, but it's a lot worse, to be honest. Goblin Trenches. Alright. So I'm afraid that my opponent is going to use the Trapper offensively at some point, and then I might be in real trouble. I'll just go into my beginning of combat, and my opponent is not activating it. So my opponent is fine with me suiciding this Deathblade Elite into all his blockers, which means that most likely the Bananish Trapper is tapping my own Trapper, so that my opponent has a ton of offense going on. So what do I do against this? I can't ever provoke the Trapper as long as my opponent has a Plains up, because my opponent will just let the provoke trigger resolve, tap something down, and then the Deathblade is attacking on its own. The option I have here is using Deathblade Elite to take out Goblin General. I'm losing the Deathblade Elite, of course. I am keeping the Halo in a sense. And then the Trapper battle is basically decided in my opponent's favor forever and ever. I have the Trenches. I'm not the biggest fan of casting it, but I might need the defense to. Also, I think it's probably just better to hold back the Deathblade Elite on defense. It's another 2/3 blocker, rather than trading it for the General here. The General gets one attack in, if that's what my opponent wants. And my opponent gets to tap down 2 of my creatures if he wants to use the Trapper offensively. Tap, for example, end of turn tap the Trapper, tap the Deathblade, or tap the Thopter Squadron, that seems more reasonable. Attack with everything, including the Idol. So then I'm facing a 3/3, a 3/3, 3 2/2s, and a Chimeric Idol, and I have 2 blockers, maybe 3 with the Goblin Trenches. Yeah, I can't let that happen. I just realized that I would be pretty much dead if that happens. So I need to get rid of the Goblin General. Sadly it has gotten too strong on this board, so I have to provoke it. All right, that's actually fine. I'm not sure if that's something that my opponent really wants to do. Not blocking Deathblade Elite is a fine decision, but now I have the Trapper, and that means, well, I will be able to dictate what's happening on the battlefield, basically. That could make a big difference. Now, it still means that my opponent is threatening this attack, and with him threatening the attack, I have the big decision whether I want to use it to tap the General. If I'm dead otherwise, I have to do that, or if I can afford to tap the Trapper, which I probably won't be able to do. Now, there's still this thing with the Idol, and if that ever attacks, then my opponent might be tapped out, so I get to eat the Trapper. So there's a lot going on here. I want to deploy the Goblin Trenches to have as many blockers as possible, but then my opponent just taps down my Trapper, and the Goblin General gets to attack. Problem is, if this ever attacks, I'm kind of in trouble. I think I have to tap it down, and then my opponent shouldn't have any attacks. Apart from tapping on the Squadron again. Wow, this is super complicated combat math, and it's getting worse because I don't have the mana to use the Gust Cloaks. I could make a bunch of 1/1s and just tap down the General. That way I would have solid blockers, but nothing amazing. If I drop Gustcloak Harrier and just make tokens with the Squadron, I have the best possible blockers, the most possible blockers. I think that's what I have to do. I can't really dominate this battlefield, and I think the trigger from the Goblin General is just happening no matter what, and because it's happening, I need to be prepared by making this Squadron the best it can be defensively. Turning it into a bunch of 1/1s allows me to chump block, for example, Chimeric Idol and Beetleback Chief, while reasonably staying alive, having a blocker for the Goblin General, and if my opponent activates Chimeric Idol, I'm just punishing him for that. Now, what my opponent, in my opinion, should have done is to block Deathblade Elite with Chimeric Idol. That was, if I have to spend 2 mana to protect the Elite, things are looking a lot worse. So it's 5 minutes against 4.5 minutes. Now my opponent is sitting there with the Trapper and his General again. Goblin Piledriver as well. Oh boy. And an aggressive tap after you've drawn the Piledriver. Don't know if that's actually in my opponent's favor. I'm not dead here. I'm quite certain about that. So this is an easy block. I need to get rid of the General long term. And now my 1/1s are not doing the best job. So I think the best block is actually just to stay alive here, preventing as much damage as possible. And then maybe getting in there with the Trenches just to survive. I can't really afford to kill anything with the Thopter Squadron. Yep, that's my block. Harrier first, then the Squadron in case I draw a Griffin. Land, all right. So now I have to take out the Trapper And am I dead then? I have the Trapper, and with the trenches I have 3 blockers total. No, I think I'm fine. I'm not in a great position by any means, but I have outs here. Now that the Trapper goes down, that's a start. Considering I'm playing against the Lotus powered start, I think I have to be happy. Now the trenches come down to help me survive on this board. And it's not even clear if I want to tap something with the Trapper. I think it might be best to eat a 2/2 with it, and the trenches are going to keep me alive against Idle and Piledriver. I expect everything to attack on my opponent's side. Beginning of combat step. Yeah, still activating the Idle, of course. So if I tap something with the Trapper, it would be maybe the Piledriver, but then my trenches are only chump blocking. If I don't tap anything, then I chump block the Piledriver and the Idle, and I only take 4, but I take out one of the other creatures, so that's better for me. I still have Deathblade lead, so Deathblade it kind of eats a creature every turn it's attacking, which isn't completely irrelevant. So this gets huge. I'm going to block, 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 take 4. I get to take out the Piledriver. My opponent is forced to block and does so. I can drop the Harrier, play this, and say go. Now I'm just trying to survive this. I'm gonna make goblins with goblin trenches. Oh no, this again. I wasn't hoping for that. I was really not hoping for that, especially because I don't really have time for it. I don't really know how this game is going to end, but I have a feeling that the clock is not going to be in my favor. Probably shouldn't be doing all these things. These ground creatures are almost irrelevant. So what I can do here is just to attack with the Harrier, and then F6 through my opponent's turn again, with me just threatening to make a bunch of goblins at some point. Alright, I'm casting that. F6ing again. I'm on 2 minutes, my opponent is on 3. I'm the one being aggressive here with the Noble Templar, so that's good, clearly. My opponent not doing anything. I have my opponent down to 12, so this game is definitely not over. Skurk Drill Sergeant, I don't think it actually matters. It actually matters. I think it actually doesn't matter. If my opponent wants to generate this, a bit of value here, I think I'm fine. I'm also not attacking with the Templar because of it. Otherwise, I think I would have gotten a bit more aggressive. Alright, I'm F6ing again. The opponent down to 10. I only have the Harrier. Let's remove auto yields. This looks dangerous. I might be dead here. It's Karvik's Torch. Alright, my opponent got me. Alright, my opponent got me. Yep, I'm not beating that. So unfortunate. Oh well, my opponent was on 10, so I wasn't particularly close to beating him here. My opponent definitely with the more powerful start. I think if the elite Halo, if I have that one turn earlier, I think I'm pretty easily winning, because I get to I get the first Trapper, and then my opponent can't cast another one, and then I eat the Ringleader, not taking too much damage. And the way it played out, it was a bit more unfortunate, sadly. All right, at least I didn't time out. That was Simon Goertzen showing you Vintage Masters. I hope you like that. Let me know in the comments what you think of the format. Do you like drafting it? Have you opened anything sweet yet, like this Black Lotus that my opponent had on turn 1? Not being salty at all. Yeah, that's it from me. See you in 2 weeks. Bye bye.